The cold air hit my face the moment I stepped out of the car, but it was nothing compared to the chill crawling up my spine as I stared at my husband's truck, parked where it never should have been. The porch light flickered, casting long, broken shadows across the driveway, and somewhere inside that house, I could hear the faint murmur of voices that were never meant for my ears. My heart dropped before my mind could even form the truth. If you've ever felt that split second when your world tilts beneath you, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Moments like this come out of nowhere. I remember gripping the railing just to steady myself, already sensing that whatever waited inside would change everything. Let me show you how it all began. I never expected my life to split open on an ordinary afternoon. But that is exactly what happened when I turned onto my daughter-in-law's street and saw my husband's truck sitting in her driveway. My name is Elaine Parker, and in that moment, something cold and heavy settled in my chest. He was supposed to be at work. She was supposed to be at home alone. Nothing about that scene made sense, and yet my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I felt myself slow the car, barely breathing, as if my instincts were trying to prepare me for whatever waited ahead. When I stepped out, the neighborhood felt strangely still, almost suspended. As I moved closer to the house, I heard the low murmur of voices inside. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone, sharp, hurried, secretive, hit me like a warning. There was tension woven into each sound, the kind that makes your stomach tighten even when you don't fully understand why. And beneath their whispers, I sensed something darker, something meant to stay hidden from me. In that instant, a realization started forming, quiet but devastating. I wasn't imagining this. Something was unfolding behind that window, something that involved me far more than I wished it did. I felt fear slip into my bloodstream, quick and electric, telling me my life was about to change in ways I wasn't prepared for. And that was the moment I knew I had to face the history that brought me here. I've spent most of my life trying to hold a family together, even when life kept finding new ways to pull it apart. After my first husband passed, the world felt unsteady, and I poured everything I had into rebuilding some sense of normal for myself and for my son, Jeremy. Those years were heavy, but they taught me how to survive, how to keep moving even when the future felt unclear. When I eventually met Mark, I wanted to believe I'd been given a second chance at peace. He had a gentle way about him, the kind that made me think I could finally exhale. And when Jeremy married Carla, I let myself believe we were becoming the kind of close, blended family I had always hoped for. I held on to small moments of kindness, brushing aside the uneasy ones that pricked at me every now and then. I told myself I was being overly cautious, that after everything I'd lived through, I just needed time to trust again. Looking back, I can see how badly I wanted harmony, how eager I was to believe the best in the people around me. But standing there in that driveway, everything I had ignored began to resurface, urging me to examine my past more closely than ever before. I remember sinking into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing anchoring me to my body. My breath came in uneven waves, and for a moment, I couldn't even turn the key. It felt as if the world I had built, piece by careful piece, had been knocked off its foundation. I kept replaying the sounds I had heard, the hurried tones, the unmistakable edge of secrecy. My mind tried to rationalize it, then rejected every excuse just as quickly. Something inside me whispered that I was in real danger, and that whisper grew louder the longer I sat there. As I finally drove home, every memory of Mark flickered through me with new meaning. The gentle gestures, The sudden interest in my schedule, the way he always offered to handle small errands that involved my car. Moments that once felt thoughtful now pressed against me with a sharpness I couldn't ignore. I felt foolish for overlooking them, but fear kept swallowing any attempt at self-blame. I was too busy trying to steady myself, trying to understand how the person I trusted could be living a life so entirely separate from the one he showed me. When I stepped inside the house, the contrast was almost unbearable. Mark greeted me with the same easy warmth he always used, and I felt myself slipping into the performance he expected from me. Smiling, nodding, pretending. Inside, though, everything was trembling. I watched him move through the kitchen with practiced charm, and beneath that surface, I sensed the truth I could no longer deny. That was the moment something shifted in me. The fear didn't fade, but it narrowed into focus. If I wanted answers, I would have to search for them myself. And that search had to begin with the parts of my life he believed I wasn't paying attention to at all. I waited until the house was quiet before I opened my laptop. My hands were still unsteady, but I forced myself to focus on the numbers in front of me. It started as a simple attempt to reassure myself, to prove that my fear was exaggerating things. But the moment I saw the first unfamiliar withdrawal, that hope evaporated. Small amounts at first, subtle enough to slip under the radar, then larger transfers tied to accounts I had never heard of. Each line felt like a thin blade sliding between my ribs. As I kept scrolling, a pattern emerged, regular payments to a name I didn't recognize, and then another tied to someone who shared Carla's maiden name. My breath caught when that realization settled. It wasn't just carelessness or misunderstanding. This was deliberate, coordinated, planned long before I ever sensed something was wrong. Memories rushed back in broken fragments, Mark insisting he handle certain bills, Carla's sudden curiosity about my insurance, little moments I brushed aside because I wanted peace more than I wanted answers. Now those pieces rearranged themselves into a picture I didn't want to see. I felt betrayed, but beneath the heartbreak, something steadier began to form. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. Still, the idea of involving Jeremy nearly stopped me. He has always been gentle, loyal, someone who wants to believe the best in the people he loves. I could already imagine the confusion in his eyes, the hesitation, the quiet doubt that would hurt more than outright disbelief. But I also knew I couldn't face this alone. Keeping silent would only give them more room to move. By the time I closed the laptop, my fear had settled into something firmer. I needed help, real help, and I needed to reach out to the people who could protect me before anything else slipped beyond my control. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that made it impossible to pretend any longer. I knew I couldn't face what I had uncovered by myself, so I gathered every document, every screenshot, every note I had taken the night before, and I drove to meet with Ruth Allen, the financial advisor who had guided me through so many transitions in my life. The moment she looked through my records, I saw the shift in her expression, a quiet seriousness that told me my instincts had been right. She moved with calm precision, helping me secure my accounts, freeze anything vulnerable, and create a clear record of every suspicious transaction. Her steadiness grounded me, reminding me that I wasn't losing my mind. Something real was happening, and it needed to be addressed. From there, I went straight to the police station. Sitting across from Detective Marissa Hall felt strangely surreal. She listened intently, never dismissing the tremor in my voice or the fear behind my words. When she identified what was happening as elder financial abuse, a mix of shame and validation washed over me. It was painful to hear, but also necessary. Someone finally saw the danger I was facing. Still, Even with her support, I felt the weight of the decision ahead. Acting too soon might protect my finances, but leave the larger threat untouched. Waiting could give us the proof needed to stop everything permanently. The risk was terrifying, yet the logic was undeniable. By the time I walked out of the precinct, I knew what I had to do. If I wanted the truth to come out fully, I would have to prepare myself, physically, emotionally, and strategically, for whatever came next. I woke the next morning with a certainty I could no longer ignore. If I didn't prepare for the worst, I might never get another chance to protect myself. So I drove straight to the only person I trusted with my car, a mechanic who had cared for it for years. Watching him disappear beneath the frame made my stomach twist, and when he finally emerged with a grave look, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. He showed me the marks where someone had been experimenting, testing angles, practicing. That word, practicing, echoed through me like a slow, heavy drum. This wasn't a moment of desperation, it was calculated. We installed a backup brake system first, something that would hold even if the original lines gave out. Then came the small camera tucked discreetly underneath, connected to an app on my phone. Knowing it was there steadied me in a way I didn't expect. It felt like reclaiming a small piece of control. At home, I slipped into a familiar performance. I let my movements stay soft, distracted, harmless. I let Mark believe I still trusted him. Pretending ignorance felt unsettling, but I knew he needed to think the plan was unfolding just the way he intended. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with the alert. The footage showed him beneath my car, working with the same quiet precision I had once admired. Seeing it confirmed everything, yet instead of breaking me, it centered me. The fear sharpened into resolve. The trap was no longer an idea. It was already in motion, and all that was left was to follow it through to the end. Driving to book club that night felt like walking a tightrope in the dark. Every press of the brake pedal reminded me how close I was to disaster, how easily the original lines could have failed if not for the backup system beneath my feet. I kept my speed low, hands steady on the wheel and in the mirror. I could see Jeremy following close behind. Knowing he was there gave me just enough courage to keep going, even as my heart pounded through every turn. At the community center, I made sure people saw me arrive. I greeted familiar faces, let them hear my voice, let them register my presence. I needed witnesses who could say exactly where I had been that night, but I barely absorbed a word of the discussion. My mind was on the drive home, the confrontation waiting for me, and the thin line between safety and danger I was balancing on. Leaving early. I felt the weight of the night settle over me. The drive back was quieter, heavier. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the surprise flicker across Mark's face. For a moment, I almost felt the echo of the man I thought he was. Then Jeremy stepped forward, holding the footage that would unravel everything. The moment Mark realized what we knew, something hollow passed through his expression. It was as if a mask he had worn for years finally slipped. The police arrived quickly, their presence filling the space with a finality I hadn't expected to feel so deeply. Watching him taken away, I felt heartbreak and relief twist together in a way I could barely process. Standing there in the doorway, I understood that the truth had finally broken open, but the aftermath was only just beginning. The days after the arrest moved in slow, heavy waves. I remember waking each morning with a jolt, as if my mind had to relearn what had happened. The house felt strangely quiet, almost hollow, and every familiar corner carried echoes of the life I thought I had. Investigators came and went, gathering statements, collecting financial records, and piecing together a story I was only beginning to understand myself. Each new detail felt like another layer of loss. When the pretrial hearings began, the strain settled deep in my chest. Sitting there, listening to attorneys outline a pattern of manipulation and calculated harm, I felt exposed and numb at the same time. It was strange hearing my own life translated into charges and evidence, as if the pain I had lived through needed a new language to be believed. Jeremy sat beside me, tense and quiet, carrying his own shock and guilt for not seeing what had grown right in front of us. The trial itself felt like moving through a long corridor with no windows. When the prosecutors presented the footage, the financial records, and the statements from people who had unknowingly witnessed parts of the scheme, the weight of truth settled into the room. Carla's guilty plea came with its own ache, a final confirmation of how deeply the betrayal ran. When the sentencing was handed down, I did not feel triumph. I felt a steady, grounded kind of clarity. Justice had been served. But justice is not the same as healing. It does not restore what was broken. It only marks the point where responsibility is named. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding trust in myself, learning to breathe without waiting for the next shock. Jeremy and I talked more openly, leaning on each other as we tried to make sense of the future. And slowly, almost quietly, a question began to take shape inside me about what I might do with everything I had learned. It was the first hint of purpose, waiting for me in the next chapter of my life. In the months after the trial, my body felt like it was finally allowed to unclench, though it took time before I could breathe without a tremor of old fear moving through me. The exhaustion was deeper than I expected, a kind that settled into my bones. I spent quiet mornings relearning simple routines, reminding myself that the danger had passed and that I was still here, still whole, even if I felt cracked in places. Jeremy and I began rebuilding our relationship slowly. There were moments when I caught the worry in his eyes, the unspoken questions about how much I was really healing. I carried my own questions too, wondering who I was now that the crisis had ended. But each conversation, each shared meal, felt like stitching together something that had been torn. I eventually found my way to a support group for survivors of elder abuse. Sitting in that room, hearing stories that echoed pieces of my own, I felt both humbled and called to something larger. When I finally shared my experience, I watched a kind of understanding wash over the faces around me, and it stirred a strength I thought I had lost. Volunteering grew from there, listening, comforting, guiding. Each act helped me reclaim a part of myself. I began to realize that my story could be more than a wound. It could be a light for someone else who felt trapped in the dark. And as that purpose took shape, I felt my life slowly turning towards something new, preparing me for the reflections still waiting to be spoken. When I look back on everything I survived, I feel a mixture of gravity and gratitude. There was a time when I could barely recognize my own reflection, when fear and disbelief seemed to fill every corner of my life. But standing here now, on the other side of all that darkness, I can see how each step, no matter how painful, carried me toward a strength I didn't know I had. I learned to trust my intuition, even when it whispered what I didn't want to hear. I learned that resilience isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the choice to wake up and try again. And I learned that healing doesn't erase the past, but it does teach you how to walk forward without letting the past define you. I'm grateful for the people who stood beside me, for the support that reminded me I wasn't as alone as I once felt. And I'm grateful for the chance to share this story, in the hope that it reaches someone who needs to know they're not alone either. If any part of my journey speaks to you, I hope you'll share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments. I read every one, and your stories matter.